I'm Bethel, co-host of a podcast for all intents and purposes, here with a video where we're going to be taking a look at Transformers Devastation, published by, or developed by Platinum Games, and published in 2015. I'm going to take you through a chapter that I think really shows us some of the interesting things that Transformers Devastation does. I've played through the game a couple times, so my character's a little overpowered, so I'll be playing it on a harder setting. Here we start in the Ark, which is also a scene you can come back to if you go to checkpoints throughout the gameplay to upgrade your characters and whatnot. You have 5 characters to choose from. We got Wheeljack, one of my personal favorites, the Autobot Engineer. We also have Grimlock, everybody's favorite Dinobot. He kicks butt. We got Optimus Prime. We also have Bumblebee. And Sideswipe. I was really kind of surprised with Sideswipe. He's not necessarily a character we all think about going to. You have 4 slots for weapons. 2 are required, melee and ranged, and then 2 free slots. I keep a free slot with a melee and a free slot with a ranged. There's a lot of weapons you can choose from. A lot of them are variations on a type, but even then, there's just a variety you come across are pretty amazing. Some sweet as hell dubstep for you. In order to sort of customize your character, you can synthesize weapons, because you get a lot of them. They don't shy away from giving weapons, and you have a limited inventory space. You can take a weapon, like the thermal hammer here, and take another weapon that you don't mind getting rid of, and synthesize it, as they call it, which upgrades not only the stats and the experience, but also you can transfer abilities that might be attached to that specific weapon. You can also equip these little techs, as they're called. I'm not sure what it stands for, but they're basically stat boosts that you can develop. You can spend some money or credits and develop them, a 1,000 or 5,000 credit version, and you just play this little mini game here to go, bing, look at that, equip that, and you'll have these things. Isn't that great? Yes, it is. You can also spend money to upgrade specific stats. Your stats go up during gameplay normally, but you can also just pump money in here and boost your power a bit. But let's go ahead and just get into the game. As you can see, Platinum Games spent a lot of time recreating the look of the original game, and spared no expense to really hinge on the nostalgia of the fans of the 1980s television show.
What's the plan, Optimus?
They brought back a lot of the original voice actors. The Autobot representation is a bit stronger than the Decepticon side. They brought back Peter Cullen for Optimus Prime, Greg Berger for Grimlock, Dan Gilvezan for Bumblebee. I'm not sure that's his name, I apologize. Michael Bell for Sideswipe.
We still have to shut it down.
Wheeljack was voiced by Chris Latta, who also did Starscream, and he died back in the 90s. And so they actually brought back 2 different voice artists to voice Starscream and Wheeljack, respectively. And the Wheeljack is stronger than Starscream. Let's just take a look at here. This is you have a strong, sort of a regular and a strong attack. You have a double jump. If you hold down R1, you eventually transform into vehicle mode. Hold R1 to transform out of it. If you just tap R1, you do a dodge, which is essential to the gameplay. You can even dodge while in vehicle mode, which is pretty cool. It's really cool. But yeah, you can't ignore how amazing this game looks with regard to being faithful to the original show. It's just gorgeous and perfect. So this is my drill range attack, and here's my awesome shockwave range attack. As you can see, it's actually shockwave as a gun. I don't know how it works narratively. They don't explain it. It's all fan service. This game is complete fan service. Even down the transformation noise. Check this out. Oh, so good. So good. One of the interesting things that all games like this have to address is how to have cannon fodder, right? Shows like this always had named characters fighting named characters, and so you have to make a design choice. So how do you fill the space between boss fights? Or do you just have boss fights, like Shadow of the Colossus style, where you just have 30 to 45 minutes between battles with a character? And for an action game, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Whoop. So there's the dodge mechanic. You see I hit it right on the spot here. It just kind of slows down, gives you sort of a bullet time kind of mechanic, so you can add in some extra hits and start combos. They have different ways to hide loot. As you saw, there's power signatures on the ground that you can slam in vehicle mode and reveal the loot within. So, one of the things in the game that I think that they do is pretty great is they do a pretty good job of sort of recreating a silly Generation 1, that's what they call the original cartoon Generation 1 story. It's absurd, it's the Decepticons trying to take over the planet, and they're basically going to terraform it. And we want to stop them. We're going to get the first appearance of a named villain.
Thundercracker. We have found
So we go into like a little chase mini-game here. The way sort of boss fights, if you will, all of the bosses are named characters, of course. There's a nice variety, but it doesn't really... I mean, I think it is probably structured mostly like, you know, go through a level, fight a boss. Again, this third stage, I kind of really wonder what the conversation was during the design of this, because it's a very strange chapter, quote-unquote. And Thundercracker's kicking my ass. Let's chase him down. Because there's... It's kind of long. Not too long, but... They're interesting... sort of like mini-boss fights, but it seems like they should be big boss fights in the middle, and things are split up, and there's lots of kind of chase, and you'll see it's a very strange chapter, and that's why I wanted to show it to you, because it does a lot of interesting things that make it a break from the norm, but also make it feel a bit more organic, which is, you know, ironic, I understand, considering it's about robots. But they did a pretty good job mimicking the art style of the original cartoon. Obviously, on the characters themselves, it looks really close, which is impressive considering that it's CG. Or 3D, I should say. They do an even better job sort of later on. Being inside a city that wasn't very represented in the show itself. They spent most of their time out in the middle of nowhere because they probably didn't want to have to deal with compromising human life, right? And so it's hard to say that, oh man, this looks like it was right out of the cartoon, because it's not very well represented. So you see a little bit here of the dodge mechanic. They have little arrows that show you when you're about to get hit, and you're supposed to hit the button right before you get hit, but we'll see more of that later because I kind of destroyed him.
Today is a good day to join our cause, Thundercracker.
My loyalty only goes so far. Tampering with plasma energy? That's madness.
Wow, that took like no convincing at all.
I don't remember if Thundercracker was as sort of non-committal in the original show. I know in the IDW comics, he is. He's become very much a neutral character. I don't follow the comics anymore, but his storyline was really interesting. He kind of, after a big cataclysmic event, he just separated from either faction and just went and tried to become I'm not lying, he tried to become a screenplay writer out in the woods and lived with a dog. You know, as you do. There's another one of these power seals here. Slam. The city map, you spend a lot of time here, and it's very big, and there is a lot of, actually sort of, not track back, but you cover a lot of the same areas again and again, usually from different angles, which is actually pretty clever. I admire them for doing it this way. It actually presents the same information but in new and interesting ways, so you don't just feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again. These guys can only be harmed either with a ranged weapon or charging them at full speed. And you know when you're at full speed when you got a little fire coming out the back of you. Boom. But they go to them pretty easily. This little green emblem here lets you go back to the Ark and change out characters. It also, if you go in and come out again, your health is restored and all your energy, ammo, and stuff like that. We get a new enemy type here. The Heavy. Robots with hammers. So you'll see the dodge mechanic here on display, and you can do some nice counter attacks, which I didn't do. Oh well. The timing is everything. Boom. So whenever you flash, that's a sign to tell you that you can do a vehicle mode attack inserted into your combo. Sometimes you can string those together, sometimes you can't. I'm sure there's more codified reasons why you can or cannot. I just don't know them, nor do I care. I always found something interesting about the Transformers in that they are a, one could say an advanced species, because they are a species, right? At the very least, they are autonomous organisms or creatures, if you will. They are living. I think if they were real, we wouldn't deny them that. But they have lasers. They can travel through space. The Decepticons can fly on their own. They don't need a spacecraft necessarily. So they kind of represent this overwhelming sophistication, technologically speaking. And yet, in this interminable war, they rely on barbaric weapons, for lack of a better word, right? Swords, and axes, and maces, and hammers. Which really shows that sophistication and advancement, I guess, is relative. Or maybe it's making a statement even on war itself, right? War is, in a sense, primal, barbaric even. And that, especially if you're stuck in a war for a long time, we'll always, in a sense, get reduced down to our basic needs in order to accomplish that. Alright, now we gotta go play fetch, get some red energon, which I don't think is in the original show at all. Oh, and this is actually the thing I really wanted to show you. So this is one of the few times, it happens again but in a different way later in the chapter, where we actually switch perspectives. And we go to this top-down perspective. Supposedly from the view of one of the satellites of Teletran 1, the Autobots' computer, right? It's sort of analogous to the computer in Star Trek. But it does present an interesting look at this game and these characters. Well, in the show, and in the game here, you can see that when they are in robot mode, they're very large. They're larger than the average human. But this actually puts us from above, and looks, I kind of call it the toy box mode. And this is something I'll probably talk about later, but it does, in a sense, represent how we played with these toys. You know, in which situation we were much larger than the toys themselves, and really kind of emphasizes the play aspect of this game. It's really going for that kind of like, this is the Transformers game you always wanted. This is the Transformer adventure you had when playing with your toys as a kid, representing that more than actually like almost another Transformers story. It's not a continuation of the show by any means, but putting it in this perspective is really interesting. And I kind of wonder why they did it, because it not only does it change the view that we look at the game with, but it innately changes the way we, in a sense, feel about the characters in the story that they're presenting. Maybe I'm overthinking it. I tend to do that. But we got some red energon. Guess what? Better than regular energon that is just food. You can throw this, shoot it, and blow it up. So let's try that. Boom. Don't get too close, it'll hurt. I forgot to mention earlier, but you can see at the top left, the circle around the Autobot symbol is blinking. That's because it's fully charged, and I can now do a character-specific super move that kind of clears the screen. The yellow bar is sort of similar. That's a character-specific ability that automatically starts recharging as soon as you use it, whereas the semicircle, you have to attack enemies and do damage and whatnot to recharge that. Wheeljack, I don't use it. His yellow bar move very much. It just brings up a shield and repels or absorbs laser fire. I might just cheat here. Oop. Out of bullets. The get up and go, the 0 to 60 of this robot is very low. So yeah, it's really interesting how differently the game controls, even though it's still responding in a sense to the same input. You don't have to look up how to play this part of the game, like a tutorial to how to play from this perspective doesn't come up or anything when you first encounter it. But it does change the way the game feels completely. And it's really neat. I wish they kind of did this at least once per level. Not necessarily this perspective, but playing with it. Instead, they just compound it almost completely into this one stage. Ugh, I'm getting creamed here. You have to really pay attention and kind of learn the animations of the different enemy types. Because yes, you can dodge... let's just do this real quick. You can dodge one hit, but some enemies throw like a 1-2 punch, and you have to dodge both to really get a good combo started. Boom. Those explosions look great. They look great. They did put a lot of love into this game. There's no doubt about that. Everything does look like it's part of a whole. That's kind of one thing I had issue with something like the DuckTales HD remaster version, where they lovingly recreated the game sprites in hand-drawn animation, but all the backgrounds were 3D, and it just was very discordant. Here, they really did a good job trying to make everything match. It all feels part of one world, instead of just like a Transformers video game. It is Transformers the cartoon, the video game. And Optimus Prime's big plan? Just throw it. Boom. Tactical mastermind.
I've long waited for the day I could fight you all myself.
The voice they got for STARSCREAM is not that impressive. Admirable effort, but not that impressive. And here we have our first boss fight with STARSCREAM. Well, we had a little cut there because of PlayStation recording problems. Sorry. Let's go ahead and use my superpower move here. Wheeljack builds a bomb and chucks it. And freezes them so you can get some extra hits in. Oh, this is cool. This is a face-off between the voices of Chris Latta, the voice of Wheeljack and STARSCREAM. He became more famous, I think, being the voice of Cobra Commander, which is basically the same voice as STARSCREAM. But it's memorable and amazing, and his contributions are remembered by kids of the 80s, I'm sure. So boss fights are kind of a cluster in that they're not that different in terms of learning how to fight, standard enemies, that they have patterns and you got to remember those patterns. And even kind of frustratingly, the patterns that some bosses use aren't unique to the bosses. I guess it makes sense though. Characters after you fight STARSCREAM start doing some of his moves, and it's like, oh, I know where that's from. But it is mostly dodge, hit, 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 dodge, hit, hit, hit. But it's super fun. It's super rewarding because it's so flashy. Platinum Games is known for that. They, of course, did things like Bayonetta and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, which if not known for deep story, are known for incredibly satisfying gameplay. And I'm getting my ass kicked here, which makes sense. STARSCREAM's important, right? Oh man, he's destroying me. The game really does an amazing job of incorporating the two modes. I was a little worried because I was a big fan of the X of Cybertron games, the War for Cybertron and the Fall of Cybertron. And I really liked how they integrated transformation, which was much different than this game. But I think actually in terms of the combat, this game blows those games out of the water because transformation is an integral part of the combat. And it's so seamless. It's beautiful. And really trades on the transforming of the Transformers. And in that sense, I think it really does capture how I rationalize transformation works for Cybertronians, right? It's a method of movement. It's a muscle, right? That they can use as easily as we can lift our arm or point a finger. It's just something that they do instinctively. A little worried here. Let's heal up. It's okay. C is passing.
Another day, Autobot.
Built tough, but not tough enough.
I'm really impressed with the incidental dialogue here. Not only like right there, but characters do speak intermittently, usually in the middle of just regular combat, or especially in the boss fights, as you probably saw with STARSCREAM. So here's another interesting thing the game does, where they switch kind of to another version of the toy box mode, as I called it. Instead of going from the top-down perspective, we get this kind of almost side view, but more isometric kind of view, and it's much more difficult because lining things up is tough, especially when they're in the air and I'm a ground-based Autobot. This is BLITZWING, of course, classic triple changer. Some pretty good moves. That spin around move is actually something you stole from Megatron, which occurs earlier in the game and of course at the end of the game. I need to heal up because I'm getting destroyed. See, I'm using these disgustingly overpowered Energon swords that not only have some good range but shoot out energy. And I equipped them because his standard weapon. Oh, this jump always kills me. Oh, especially when you're getting shot. Hello. Whoa! Insert Wilhelm scream. But his standard weapon are actually wrenches, and so he dual wields by nature. So I'm like, okay, I'm not too conflicted with him using two swords. And in a more recent cartoon, Transformers Prime, they kind of combined the Wheeljack character with the comic character Drift. So he's kind of this warrior badass engineer, where he has two swords as well. So I'm like, okay, I can justify it. That's something they actually do. They take some of the, even though it's mostly based on Generation 1 or like the original cartoon, like I said, they do bring in some interesting elements from other fictions. Mostly the IDW fiction, the comic. IDW is a comic book publisher. They've had a Transformers series or 2 or 3 going for many years now. Has it been over a decade, perhaps? But that's basically it in terms of the alternate view. We get some interesting game spaces later on where you have a fight in space, and so it's not on a two-dimensional plane, which can get difficult and confusing and nauseating if you're not prepared for it.
Oh, I'm gonna feed you your own spark, Autobots!
Let's go! BLITZWING's not down yet.
You got that right, Auto Scum. This guy doesn't know when to quit. No more fooling around.
So in addition to his own moves, Blitzwing has moves stolen from both Starscream and Megatron, being that he can turn into both a jet and a tank. Yes, Megatron is represented as a tank in this game, which is not surprising, because how do you have an epic fight between a car and a floating handgun? Which might have been pretty rad. As you can see, the action is very repetitious, and that kind of gets to the heart of my issue with the game, in a sense. And it's not a bad thing. I still love this game. I love it. I think it's super fun. But I'm like, is this the Transformers game, right? And it kind of represents this ideal Eye of the Storm created by smashing the two fronts together of nostalgia and nerd culture. And it makes it clear how great something like this can be if it's approached with sort of attentiveness and knowledge of the franchise. But also what's difficult about doing something like this. Many adults kind of claim ownership over the franchises that we loved as youth. And a lot of reviews of this game have talked about how they have finally made the game that Transformers deserves, or at least something that the Transformers game we've always wanted. And to that point, I'm not exactly sure, because I know full well what those original Transformers cartoons were and weren't. And I've tried my best in the ensuing years to try to shed any of the added meaning or quality that I have added to them over the years, to sort of defend my youth. Because there's nothing wrong with what they actually are. They're toy commercials that have children's programming constraints around them, right? They were cheap but effective cartoons, and due to reasons from budget to story needs, they actually didn't have a whole lot of action in those cartoons. The closest we got was probably the 1986 movie, and even then it's restrained by modern standards. I shouldn't talk so much, I keep dying. But don't worry, I got a floating robot to repair me. But in the discussions about this game, people have countered sort of the notion of like, well, they didn't have a whole lot of action in the original cartoon, with something like, well, if the executive producers or whatever had more respect for this franchise, which they didn't really know what it would become at that point, they would have given it the budget it deserved, and it would have had more action. I'm like, that's not fair, right? Because we got the show that we got, and we have to assume at some level the show that we got was what the creators wanted. And of course, they weren't trying to create an epic generation making, milestone kind of thing. They were creating a show to sell toys. And they had writers that wanted to tell stories. And they had to tell stories that met the needs of children's programming, like I said. But even into that end, they bent the boundaries quite a bit. They did some real interesting stuff. Not all of it good, but some interesting stuff. I think I just grabbed a missile. But even then, all that Hasbro wanted was people to buy toys. And they realized that to sell more toys, it wasn't like the cars or the jets necessarily that the kids latched onto. It was the characters that turned into those cars and jets, right? The shows needed to show, more than anything, that a car could change into a robot. But if a kid were to see a toy at like a store, to get the kids to be ravenous for the toy, it wasn't because it was a Lamborghini, right? It was they wanted it badly because it was Sideswipe or Wheeljack, right? And that's amplified by the fact that they couldn't afford or didn't want to spend for the rights to specific vehicles anyway. So there's a focus on character in the original show, more on character, less on action, even though they did their best to do both. And there is character in this game, but it's not the focus, right? Not that there shouldn't be action, there should. However, to be quote-unquote true to the show, which is clearly what Platinum Studios was going for, they may want to actually reference the show for more than just the looks, but for its superficial, budgetary restrained compromises as well. Because it's this holistic combination of what it actually was that caused it to make a mark on the generation, and not necessarily what kids wanted it to be in their own heads, right? Not necessarily the stories we came up with while playing with the toys. And that's kind of is what this game feels like. It doesn't feel like I said at the beginning, it doesn't feel like a extension of the show. It doesn't feel necessarily even like a part of the show. It feels like people playing with toys. And especially with those toy box vision modes that we go into in this chapter specifically, we're just playing with toys, and we're not. I feel we're not necessarily playing Wheeljack, even though they do their best and they do an admirable, wonderful job. And but is it the Transformers game? I don't know. I think it misses some marks, but that doesn't mean it's a bad game. It's a wonderful game, and Transformers fans should play it.
Wheeljack, find a way to get that thing off
You got our
the planet.
MacGuffin here.
I don't want it on Earth any longer than necessary.
Optimus Prime wants to protect Earth. I think they capture the characters really well from what we see of them. They feel like and act like, and of course sound like the characters from the show, and that's really cool. But I wish there was a little bit more. So that's a long look at this game, but it's a really interesting level, and that's why I wanted to show all of it in one. It's a fun game. If you want action, if you like Transformers, especially Generation 1 stuff, you should definitely check it out. Be sure to check out our website and YouTube channel for additional video content. Be also sure to check out a podcast for all intents and purposes, your 14th source for all nerdy and geeky news and discussion, hosted by two overeducated, codependent nerds. So until then, I'm D. Bethel, and for all intents and purposes, that was a video.